Beyond good characters, a good story also needs interesting places. Places often dictate certain rules and limitations that influence the characters and their interactions. Some have a weaker influence, others a stronger. For example, a small uninhabited island definitely forces different rules and limitations on characters than being inside the tavern. Today, I want to have a closer look at the Dead Marshes we know from The Lord of the Rings. But before we start, a few hints. I try to pronounce names as Tolkien described it, and shoutouts to Kimberly80 for allowing me to use her artwork. The Dead Marshes are dangerous wetlands northwest of Mordor. A swamp area always limits and slows movement and makes it dangerous to walk through it. In this regard, only few travel through areas like these, which creates loneliness for travelers, but also the danger that one wrong step could be your last. Nobody will come to help you. This also leads to these areas often being unexplored, which is the foundation for mystery and the creation of legends and mythology. The earliest notes and potentially the origin of the Dead Marshes are from the end of the Second Age, around the Battle of the Last Alliance, but those wetlands most likely existed far before that. The lands in these regions were most likely quite uninhabited and unexplored by elves, men and dwarves around this time, and so nothing was recorded prior. But if we look closer on this map, we see another swamp area southwest of it called Nindalf or Wetwang. Potentially, they were connected, or the Dead Marshes could be an extension of it. Galadriel's husband Celeborn recommends the Fellowship to avoid the Nindalf, which would also be a recommendation anyone would give when it comes to the Dead Marshes. Nobody would ever try to travel through those except if they would be in dire need, which, as we will learn, becomes a common reason why people go there. Originally, the Dead Marshes were much smaller and grew over time after the Battle of Dagorlad, where the last alliance fought for months against Sauron's forces close to the Black Gate. After this battle, the dead were buried in this region, but over time the marshes grew further, and those graves and their many dead bodies became a part of it, giving it its name, the Dead Marshes. Sauron was defeated around this time too, hiding in the Far East, so I would assume this happened naturally and not due to dark powers. However, lore-wise, there are also some interesting details here. I covered the battles of the Last Alliance in multiple videos already, for example the history of the elves or the Sauron lore video if you're interested. So I won't cover every detail here. The Elven forces consisted of several armies. Gil-galad was the High King of the Noldor elves. The Noldor are one of the original 3 great clans of the elves. He also had some elves from another great clan, the Teleri, in his service. However, the Teleri split into other subgroups over time. For example, the Sindar elves or the Sylvan elves. Historically, the Noldor were not very popular among the Teleri because they once murdered their kin in the 3 so-called kinslayings, caused by the greed of some of the Noldor for the 3 most powerful and precious elven gems in existence, called the Silmarillion. Revenge against Sauron's master Morgoth had to do with it too. The story of those gems forged a powerful fate that turned into a curse. It was broken at one point, but I would argue its aftermath had still some effect on the elves living in Middle-earth. Beside Gil-galad, there were 2 Sindar kings. One was Mal-galad, who must be most likely identical with Amdir, who ruled over Lothlorien and the Sylvan and Sindar elves living there. Galadriel and Celeborn would later rule over Lothlorien too, after the death of Amdir's son. The other elven king was Orofer, which is the father of Thranduil, who also fought with the Last Alliance, and the grandfather of Legolas. He ruled over the Sylvan elves living in Greenwood the Great, later known as Mirkwood. It was also known as the Woodland Realm. At this time, these elves dwelt in Amon Lang, which will be later known as Dol Guldur. The mentioned conflict with Sauron's master and the events around the Silmarillion has tainted the relation of some of the Elven clans to this day. I see this as a distant echo of the doom that was upon the First Age through the Silmarillion. Amdir and Orofer did not want to be under the command of Gil-galad and did their own thing, not listening to the battle plans of the Noldor. They were in comparison also ill-equipped, which resulted in heavy losses for them and the deaths of both kings. Orofer charged at the enemy ahead of the Noldor forces. He and many of his men were slain, but Thranduil survived. Then, in the ongoing long battle, Amdir was cut off and slain too, while his troops were driven into the Dead Marshes by Sauron's forces. As mentioned, you only go there in dire need, and they had no other place to escape, perishing in this dangerous territory. With this we have elves and likely some orcs laying there, and later men and probably even dwarves could be added as the marshes extended and consumed the graves of the dead from the Battle of Dagorlad. They fought months and days, so you can assume heavy casualties. After the final victory of the last alliance of elves and men and cutting the One Ring from Sauron's finger, which resulted in them basically conquering big parts of Mordor, it became silent around the Dead Marshes for quite some time. As mentioned, why would anyone go there? And now with all the corpses in the dark pools of these wetlands, they became even more mysterious and spooky. It's a weird place. I imagine it as silent, but in a terrible way. It's not peaceful because it's dangerous to pass and terrible things happened there, leading to the death of many elves and likely to some desperate trespassers trying to make their way through it. The next mention of the Dead Marshes is almost 2000 years later in Third Age 1944. Gondor was attacked from the north by a huge Easterling faction called the Wain Riders and from the south by the Haradrim. Both Easterlings and Haradrim coordinated their attacks so that Gondor had to split its armies. We talk about the exact circumstances in, for example, my History of Rohan video in more detail. Rohan's ancestors fought the Rain Riders too. Gondor's king Ondoher was utterly defeated by the Wain Riders north of Gondor through a surprise attack around Dagorlad. It was a disaster for him and his kingdom. Not only the king died, also his two sons. The surprised soldiers fled into the Dead Marshes, where they perished. The Wain Riders, who used chariots in battle, which gave them their name, celebrated their victory, but in the meantime the South Army, led by the king's second cousin, once removed, I had to look this term up, defeated the Haradrim in the far south and returned to Gondor. This time the tables were turned. He surprised the celebrating Wain Riders in their camp, that's also why it's called Battle of the Camp, and got revenge for Gondor, driving the fleeing Wain Riders into the Dead Marshes too, where they perished. We see a pattern here, but it also makes the Dead Marshes almost a haunted place, like a realm of death. You only go there if you have no other way of escaping, but your fate or doom in this place will be death. It was so for the Sylvan Elves, it was so for the men of Gondor and the men of the Easterlings. In a weird way, it's only fitting that the area expanded and consumed the graves of those fallen in the Battle of Dagorlad, and again it remained silent. About 1000 years later, the world reached a time where the One Ring entered the continent from oblivion again. After the mentioned Silmarillion, the One Ring is the next powerful artifact changing the fate of Middle-earth and its people. And interestingly, it seems, and here we slowly enter the territory of my personal theories and interpretations, that this fate was greater than what happened before in and around the Dead Marshes. To this point, people who came here died, making it like a mystical realm of death in Middle-earth. But when Bilbo found the One Ring, which was also his fate, Gollum left the Misty Mountains to search for his precious and the hobbit who stole it. We discussed Gollum's route in, for example, episode 4 of my book Film Differences series. There we learned that he was drawn to Mordor by Sauron's summoning and caught by the Dark Lord. It is possible that he crossed the Dead Marshes when he first entered Mordor, but he definitely crossed them when he left it again. It was also here where Aragorn found and captured poor Gollum. And with these events and later Frodo, Sam and Gollum crossing the Dead Marshes again, we see a huge difference. Nobody dies here anymore. It's actually the opposite. They go there to not be seen by the enemy or to escape them successfully. I interpret this as the fate of Gollum, Aragorn, Frodo and Sam being greater than of those who perished here in the past. There is a greater plan they must fulfill, and so they won't perish in the Dead Marshes, crossing the realm of the dead, you could say. Tolkien played a lot with fate in his books, and in my opinion it shows here too. It was Gollum's fate to destroy the One Ring. It was Frodo's and Sam's fate to bring the One Ring as close as possible to Mount Doom, and it was Aragorn's fate to save Frodo, Sam, marry Pippin, and become king. With this, they were not affected by the fate the Dead Marshes usually has prepared for those who try to journey through it. When the marshes were mentioned in the past, it was only described what happened there. We learn more about how they actually look and what makes them so dangerous in the story of The Lord of the Rings. As mentioned, Frodo, Sam and Gollum wander through them, which we can read in the chapter The Passage of the Marshes. The most bizarre thing would be the flames and dead faces in the water. Sam describes terrified that when one of those dancing flames appears, he can see faces in the water. It's not clear if this happens through the emitted light or was a requirement for them to be visible at all. As a side note, Peter Jackson's film adaptation has some differences to the books, but captures the core essence of it quite well in my opinion. Most of what is described in the book can be explained to some degree. Swamps produce swamp gas through rotting vegetation in the pools and meres, and the characters in the book comment very often on the smell and the weird air in this area that almost makes them dizzy. Frodo also feels how he is getting closer to the eye and how the ring becomes a heavier burden. They can't really find rest and seem to wander half asleep and exhausted. A good condition for hallucinations. I think in ancient European mythology we also find mentions of dancing flames in moors. An explanation could be self-combustion of the rising swamp gas here and there. They also wonder how dead bodies from thousands of years ago could be still in the water. We of course know about bog bodies, even though there are very specific requirements for this to happen. But if we look closer into the text, we see that there are some problems with these explanations. They all have the same hallucinations. That's weird, but maybe could be explained by seeing a bog body from time to time, which makes them unconsciously see similar hallucinations in the water. Gollum, however, says something really weird. You cannot reach them, you cannot touch them. We tried once. Yes, precious, I tried once, but you cannot reach them. Only shapes to see, perhaps not to touch. No, precious, all dead. Sam looked darkly at him and shuddered again, thinking that he guessed why Smeagol had tried to touch them. So it seems they are like ghosts in the water. Also Sam guesses that this could be devilry hatched in the Darkland. Of course, hallucinations can't be touched either, but it could be something like ghosts or phantoms or the Oathbreakers. It also seems if you watch the lights too much, you can get drawn into the pools too. There's the theory that Sauron or one of his powerful servants, like the Witchking, summoned ghosts into this area as a line of defense. If you want to get from the area of the Blackgate to, for example, Minas Morgul, while not getting too close to Mordor, you need to go through the Dead Marshes. It also prevents armies to attack from that angle, because an army would not pass wetlands like these. Maybe these ghosts are a weaker form of the Barrow-wights. It It's also not clear when the marshes became like this, and Sauron did not possess the One Ring the whole time, so he was weakened a lot. But that is true for the summoning of the Barrow Wights too. Still, what makes me wonder? The faces seem very passive compared to, for example, the Barrow Downs, and the people who died here were not cursed, so I would exclude them being like oath breakers. The Dead Marshes were like a realm of death, so a mystical component like this makes sense, especially in a world that was created to be mythology. My personal theory is more a hybrid form. They could be like an afterimage of the dead that can be seen because of the physical conditions of this environment. Many people were doomed to die here and fought for greater cause or fate. Being half asleep and exposed to probably a lot of swamp gas will probably manifest images of those who once died here. In a sense, it is like a cemetery, and on a cemetery you remember the dead, which happens here too in a more twisted way because of the things that happened in the past, it being close to the Dark Land, it actually being a graveyard once, and because of fate and mythology. What I like about this theory is that it has a link to the physical component of the world, but also to the unseen. It fits to mythology, which often has some distant true core. In a fictional and mythological world, we of course have the possibility of supernatural elements being there, but since Tolkien describes so many plausible details of the environment, I would not ignore those and make it a purely supernatural phenomenon, but include these details and connect them to Tolkien's view of fate and mythology instead. Tolkien wrote in letter number 226 that he was probably inspired by what he has experienced in the Battle of the Somme in World War I. The war turned the area in a muddy wasteland where probably water pools built in craters on the ground, and maybe sometimes you could see dead bodies in them. Tolkien does not go into detail, but considering what a terrible war it was and how many people died there, I can see how he came up with this realm of death, the Dead Marshes. Thank you for watching. This topic got suggested by Andrew and later by JCP Project. It was on my list for quite some time, and I moved it from the Comments Questions series to the Interesting Places series. I hope I could share a more unique view of the Dead Marshes. Oh, and as a little side note, I think it should be pronounced Dagorlad, stress on the second syllable, but now it's too late. I want again to hint towards my Discord server. Feel free to join, especially if you like riddles. I potentially also stream a bit on Twitch TV shortly after uploading this episode, but only a short stream. I hope you liked this video. If so, please press the like button, leave a comment and check my other lore videos if you haven't yet. In case you are still watching and want to subscribe, consider pressing the annoying bell. All this helps me and my channel a lot. Next video could be gaming related, but I also want to continue my film-book differences series. Besides this, I also have another lore-related interesting topic in mind. In case some big news regarding the Amazon Lord of the Rings related series are released, I would prioritize them. Again, thank you for watching and goodbye.